In 1975, he directed Jaws. In 1978, he directed Close Encounters of the Third Kind. In 1981, he directed Raiders of the Lost Ark. And now, Steven Spielberg brings us E.T., the Extraterrestrial. We will witness the arrival, the search, the desertion, the fear, the discovery, the friendship,
I'm keeping him.
the secret, the love, the warning, the signal, the mystery, the danger. The intrusion, the wonderment, the enchantment, the hope. The connection has been made. Universal Pictures presents Steven Spielberg's E.T., the Extraterrestrial.
Hi, everyone, and welcome once again to Geekfest Rants. I'm Carlos Perone, and we are continuing today with part 2 of our 1982 special. On this part, we are continuing to highlight some of the major genre films that came out in 1982. So join myself and Steve Avona as we pick it up where we left off last week with 1982.
Okay, what do we have next? We have the film that we talked about at the top of the podcast, E.T., the Extraterrestrial.
Whew. What could be said about E.T. that has not been said?
What can we say? Let me just quickly ask you, which I don't think I've ever asked you before. Do you like the film?
I love the film.
Okay.
I mean, I loved it more when I was younger. It spoke to me more, a younger self. The fact that the kid, the family structure was a little different for me. This is a kid who has one parent and a brother and a whole bunch of friends who hang out with his brother and kind of shun him away. So that was a little different for me. But the fact that when this kid goes into his room and that's his world, he has his Star Wars figures, he has all his stuff set up the way he wants it, and it's like he lives in a separate world once he goes into his room. That is one of the things that really spoke to me.
Right.
The movie also at the time, to me, it had some scary scenes. I mean, I watch it now and it's not scary, but the guys in the astronaut suits and the hazmat suits walking around, Peter Coyote's character, he's always in silhouette with the keys and the dark and the lights behind them, very menacing looking. Mm-hmm. The almost ending where E.T. kind of dies, very emotional. I remember tearing up and I'm like, what the hell is this going on? I didn't pay to come to a movie theater to cry. I think it was also one of the first films, and I could probably count them in one hand, that I actually brought my parents to come see afterwards at a second viewing. Because my parents would never go to the movies with me. They really didn't like going to the movies, and other than forcing them to take me to see a Star Wars film when I was very young, this was probably one of the first films I insisted they should see.
Okay.
So it was at the time, E.T. was big for me, very big.
I don't know if it was as big for me. I definitely enjoyed it. It's not my favorite Spielberg film by a mile. I think I appreciate it more as an adult than I did as a kid. I don't know. Maybe I was more attracted to the darker material as a kid, but I can remember seeing it re-released in a director's edition with some added footage and some controversial stuff done to it in terms of toning down like guys with guns CGI'd out instead of them pointing guns at children. They had walkie-talkies, whatever. I'm getting off on a tangent here. But I can remember watching it as an adult and not having seen it for many years, and it really just got me. Again, I'm like you. I'm an only child. I didn't have siblings. Parents were not divorced, as Elliot's were in the film. But yeah, it spoke to me. At the time when I was a kid, I had a group of friends who were kind of geeky like me, and we did all right. But I think as I got older, and reminded me of not always fitting in and escaping into that world. Elliot had his Star Wars toys displayed in his room, and he had Greedo, and he had all the other ones, and he was showing ET.
Also, I don't know about you, but the bike scene where all the kids are riding their bikes, and it's, they could be a Hell's Angels gang for all you know.
Yeah,
It's just a bunch of stupid kids in bikes, but it's such
yeah,
an energetic,
yeah,
like you're like, yeah, I could do that. I have a
yeah,
bike.
yeah,
I could ride
yeah.
like
Oh,
that.
it's
It
every
was,
kid's fantasy.
oh yeah, being chased
Yeah,
around, and they're
a-
jumping these,
and they're
these ramps and these hills and
and
stuff.
they're flying. Yeah, I
Oh yeah,
mean,
that's
it was definitely uplifting and very
yeah.
sweet. But I definitely feel it spoke to me more as an adult. And I actually had the opportunity at one of the conventions that I attended to meet Dee Wallace, and she was such a wonderful lady. And the first thing she said to me before I got anything out is, well, tell me your story relating to ET. What struck me was that so many people had been so personally affected by this movie, and in her life going to conventions and things like that, people were telling her how the film impacted them. And
Wow.
she obviously got a lot of satisfaction out of that and was a very genuine and warm person. And I just think that it is a wonderful film. But even saying that, it probably does not crack my top 10 of sci-fi geek films as much as
Wow.
I like the film. But yeah, I don't. We've never really talked about ET, and that's really where I fall on it.
All right. Now we're back to post ET.
Okay, now we're talking post ET. ET came out on June 11th of 1982. 2 weeks later, on June 25th, two of probably the most important science fiction films of the decade came out and were completely destroyed by ET. And those are The Thing and Blade Runner. I just think it's so completely ironic that they came out on the same day. And while The Thing is a little bit more horror than sci-fi, it definitely qualifies as sci-fi. And if I could just talk about Blade Runner. Blade Runner, I think, suffered not only because of ET, but because audiences just could not accept Harrison Ford in
Yes.
this role, in this bleak film, when they were used to him as first Han Solo and then Indiana Jones. You're really seeing him try to stretch himself as an actor, and nobody was buying it. I think it's one of the most important science fiction films ever made, much less of the year or of the decade.
Definitely. The older you get, the better the movie gets, and the more you learn to appreciate it.
Yeah.
When I saw it, I did see it in the theater. Now, I'm 12 years old. I'm seeing an R-rated film in the theater, which is unusual for me.
Yeah.
The only reason I wanted to see it is because of Harrison Ford. He's coming off of Raiders of the Lost Ark, so I must watch anything he's in. It was science fiction, but it was a little, yes, it was dark. I was completely amazed by the visuals that I was
The
seeing.
production design.
Amazing. Talk about something that holds up. You could, I think in 50 years that will still hold up.
Yeah.
But yeah, the story was very dark and kind of slow, and
Hmm.
there was just nothing happy, nothing
Yeah.
uplifting. It was just a
Yeah.
downer from beginning to end. But like I said, the older you get, the more you appreciate this film. And of course, no wonder that's why it probably failed. On one side, you have E.T. clobbering everything its wake, and on the other side, you have a downer of a movie.
I would only add that I did not see Blade Runner a year later on home video. And I would say that while the film didn't initially, just completely grab me, I definitely enjoyed it. I was a little shocked by it. I think I was starting to grow in my film tastes at this time. So even though I was not getting what I hoped I was getting when I saw Blade Runner, I appreciated it. It definitely wasn't something that I was like, oh, I got to see that again, or I have to buy it, I have to own it. But by the time the film was released on Laserdisc and they had the Criterion, I was definitely a fan.
Yes.
You're talking about Ridley Scott, the man who directed Alien,
Hmm.
and he's a phenomenal director.
Definitely top
And
pedigree we're talking about here.
oh yeah, and as you said, the production design has a timeless quality to it because it combines futuristic elements with retro elements, and the film itself is a throwback,
Hmm.
even though it's really science fiction.
Film
It's a
noir from
throwback
the
film
40s.
noir. Yeah, it's film noir.
They
It's
called it
40s detective future noir.
future noir. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah.
I think they called it
So
retrofitting. They
yeah,
they coined the term retrofitting.
yeah. I can't say enough good things about the film. I remember when the work print was discovered and released without the narration, the horrible narration in the city. I believe it was around 1993. I went to see it in the which I never used to do. I would never. This Long Island boy would never go into Manhattan to see a movie, but I did that for Blade Runner.
Well, I went to see the last one, which is the final cut
Yeah.
in Manhattan. I saw that, which is the final version that we most of us
Yes.
own now,
Yes.
which was amazing. The print looks so clean. It looked like something that was just made that year.
Yes.
Incredible how they restored that film.
Hmm.
Now, what was the other film you said that also came out that week? The Thing?
John Carpenter's The Thing.
Once again, yes, we have touched upon this film a little bit in the past. Again, a film that I did not see until it came out on video. Super violent in terms of the type of makeup effects and mechanical effects that they did. It combines, I think, the best of both worlds. The John Carpenter style. His stars, you got Russell. I mean,
Yeah.
that's classic Carpenter
Yeah.
right there, and a classic sci-fi
Hmm.
story. This isn't an original one for him. This is something he's not the writer, and it's a modern take on the story, which I like because I can appreciate the original, but the original is very 50s, very Red Scare type of
Yeah.
theme.
Yeah.
The monster looks like looks like Lurch from the Addams Family.
Right.
This one was balls to the wall crazy horror.
Hmm.
And again, to me, it holds out. I loved it. It's one of these films I regret not seeing in the movie
Yeah.
theater.
I just to piggyback on what you said, it's classic Carpenter. It's very, very suspenseful, which I think people forget because I think what struck audiences at the time and critics at the time was that it was so violent and that threw people. But it's very suspenseful. It's very much classic horror. And Carpenter does
Yes.
a wonderful job of maintaining that atmosphere of dread. Kurt Russell and the rest of the ensemble. You have Wilford Brimley and Keith David. Really terrific. Carpenter is a master at creating ensemble casts that you just
Hmm.
would never expect. And, like you, I didn't see it until video or, I mean, possibly cable, one or the other. And it was a major, major disappointment for Carpenter because it was his first studio film. And after all these sort of indie hits that he had with Escape from New York and The Fog and Halloween, this, I think, was his first of many crushing blows for him in his career.
I would say it's definitely part of the Carpenter trinity. Top three films of Carpenter.
Mhm.
This one is probably, I don't know, I would say
Yeah.
it's tough. Between Halloween and Escape from New York and The Thing, sometimes I interchange those. Straight out horror, Halloween, sci-fi action, Escape from New York, and suspense, thriller, sci-fi, and horror, The
Yeah.
Thing. It hits all three at the same time. It's
It
amazing.
does. The only other thing I would add about the thing is that a prequel is coming out. I honestly thought it was supposed to be out already, but I'm sure. I mean, it's
They keep
definitely
changing the date.
they keep changing the date, and we're going to be treated to what happened to the Norwegian scientists
Hmm.
that were the ones who discovered the spacecraft. And I'm actually interested in this film.
As far as concept goes, it's an interesting concept. Let's see how they do with the execution.
Yeah.
What's next?
The next film, which is a film we've covered extensively prior podcasts, July 9th, 1982, Tron.
Oh boy, yeah, you're absolutely right. We beat this one to death. Tron, another one of these innovative, groundbreaking films. The new technology. What's not new technology is fake technology that looks like new technology. The film itself, I found a little slow, a little kind of
Yeah.
moves kind of at its own slow pace. But then when you get into the action sequences, it's like you wake up again. It's like, wow, this is amazing. And then it kind of slows down again. It goes back and forth. Recently, they rebooted, but they actually made a sequel. It's not a reboot, but a super modern,
Yeah.
super modern sequel that I absolutely loved. And it makes me appreciate the original even more. It was the Disney project, somewhat of a disappointment. They did, I believe, they were
Yeah.
coming off the black hole disappointingly, and then they moved into Tron with a
Yeah.
little more live action disappointment. But the movie kind of stayed under the radar, and a cult favorite, and
Yeah.
it would pop up on conventions. People would talk about
Hmm.
him, and then
Yep.
many, many years later, got the success that it deserved, I
And
guess.
I think that's the thread that we're talking about with this year is that these films that were not appreciated in their initial release have become classics, have spawned sequels and reboots, and there's definitely an audience for them. Tron, for me, didn't grab me originally, but I came to appreciate it later on. There's a sort of Disney goofiness to it
Yep. Yep.
that it can be endearing or it could be annoying, depending on your mood. But I love Jeff Bridges. He's definitely the anchor for me. And I was very happy with Tron Legacy. And we should also mention that the film grossed about $170 million, Tron Legacy. And there's writers have been hired to do a script for Tron 3. There's going to be an animated series, I believe,
Yep.
in the fall. So there is hope for this franchise. Whether or not Tron 3 happens is still a little bit up in the air, but they've proven there's an audience.
Yep. You're
Yep.
absolutely right.
The next film that we have to talk about is straight out balls to the wall horror, and that's Creepshow. George Romero's Creepshow.
A slightly smaller film, not a big studio gigantor release, but I believe I might have seen it on cable. This was definitely a cable viewing for me. At the time, I wasn't a big Stephen King fan, and I think he contributed to some of the stories here or there. But George Romero attached to this film, he had a reputation for, all the Dead films.
Mhm.
It was interesting. I never seen at the time an anthology type of a movie that told you all these little stories. The horror was kind of shocking at times. You get to see some of, it's like a resume of horror, makeup effects. Tom Savini, I think, was involved. The stories kind of match that kind of horror.
At the time Creepshow was released, you had mentioned you had never seen horror anthology films prior to Creepshow, and neither had I. But I became a really rabid horror movie fan later in my life, probably when we were in college. I had a few people kind of introduce me to the world of horror going back to like the 30s, the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And there were many, many horror anthology films released at the time, mostly in England. I really enjoy that type of film. And Creepshow, it was definitely a throwback not only to that film, but to the EC comics of the 50s that were done before the Comics Code came out, and actually are kind of the reason for the Comics Code being released. They were just these incredibly violent, sadistic stories of revenge and mistreating women and all kinds of just really horrible things, and kids had access to them. But you could say that it contributed to delinquency of the minors, but really what it did was it spawned a generation of directors like Joe Dante and John Landis who grew up on these comic books and obviously the films of the 50s, and John Carpenter, but starting kind of got their start with comic books like this. This is sort of a love letter to those films. I mean, it's incredibly gory. It's incredibly over the top. It has many, many name actors in the film, like Leslie Nielsen, Ted Danson, E.G. Marshall. Stephen King himself is in the film.
Yep.
Adrienne Barbeau. You really have a lot of big name actors who are contributing their talent to kind of a nasty schlocky film. And I think it's terrific. I think it holds up. And I think it's probably, aside from the original Night of the Living Dead, I think it's Romero's best film. I'm not a huge, huge fan
Wow.
of Dawn of the Dead, but it's definitely my number 2 Romero.
Cool.
Okay, the next film we have up, which we can probably go over fairly quickly because we've talked about it, and I know you're not a huge fan, is Halloween 3, Season of the Witch.
Yeah, we talked about this before. My biggest beef with this film is the fact that I would like it a lot better if it had nothing to do with Halloween, if it wasn't marketed as a Halloween sequel. It's a nice little creepy standalone horror film, I guess. Not
Mhm.
big, but the fact that it's marketed on purpose, obviously, and this isn't by accident. It's marketed as a sequel, and it has nothing to do with Halloween. That's my biggest gripe with the film.
Yeah.
I remember the marketing like crazy. Oh my God, another Halloween film. Oh, cool, cool. And then it's like,
Right.
okay.
Yeah, which I see your point. It doesn't stick in my craw the way it does for you. It's definitely not a continuation of the series, and I can admit that John Carpenter has a very minimal involvement in it. And I agree with you. It's a creepy film. I think it's an effective film. It doesn't hold up quite as well as I wished it would, but it has its memorable moments and its memorable scares. And after the movie was released, shockingly, they continued the series. They went back to the Michael Myers character after I thought the series was completely dead. And, it's gone on ever since.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, now we're finally in the month of December. And here's another film that I have not seen. And maybe you can just tell us a little bit about Time Rider.
Time Rider I saw on HBO, as I did a lot of movies. And I don't know if you could say it's low, but it is kind of low budget because it's a very ambitious sci-fi story. And it's funny because you have a movie like Cowboys and Aliens coming out pretty soon. This is a cowboy time travel film,
Oh.
kinda. And it's Fred Ward riding around in a motorcycle in the West.
Yeah.
In the 1800s.
Yeah.
And like I said, it doesn't surprise me it came out in December. I'm surprised it even made it to theaters. Again, this is the type of film that would have gone straight to video.
Yeah.
But it might have been in the theater for a week or two. Never heard of it until I saw it later on HBO. And it kind of falls under the realm of the movies we talked about earlier. It's the Beastmaster type of thing. It's the Sword and the Sword. These tiny, memorably bizarre movies that get lost in the shuffle for real legitimate reasons. These are not overlooked masterpieces. These are crappy, guilty pleasures.
Yes, absolutely.
And it deserves to be where it is.
Yes. Yes. So I can't contribute since I didn't see the film. So we're finally at the end. We're in December. And I believe this was a big holiday release at the time. And that's The Dark Crystal.
Wow. Yes. That I remember I was looking forward to because I knew it had a Jim Henson involvement.
Yes.
The trailer for it looked amazing. You see these creatures moving around and you're like, well, that cannot be a person because it won't fit in there. And now granted, after seeing the film, it was a little disappointing.
Yes.
It was a little Muppety. You could kind of tell there are guys hiding under, with hand puppets and this and that, but it still managed to provide a really fantasy environment that hadn't been seen too much before. They started doing stuff at that point that was not your average Muppet, Sesame Street Muppet Show type of Muppet.
Oh, yeah.
They were doing some more elaborate stuff with combination of actual hand puppetry and
puppets,
rods and all kinds of weird stuff and combining them all so that it kind of kept you guessing sometimes as to what exactly you're seeing. Very fantasy, very, an environment that really it's kind of like, okay, it's an interesting try what they did. I don't think they succeeded extravagantly, but it was an interesting try. Kind of like Tron at the time. It was different, but it wasn't a blockbuster.
I saw it in the theater and I was impressed at the world that was created. Definitely, as you pointed out, Jim Henson stretching his muscles in a way he never had before. And I was impressed. The movie was very slow, and it was also stupid humor injected here and there that, certain characters that just didn't work for me. It's a film I would like to see again to kind of give it a proper reappraisal. Honestly, I've bought the DVDs that have come out, the special editions, but it just sat on the shelf and I still haven't watched them. Hopefully I maybe give it another whirl and see if my opinion changes. But I tend to agree with you in that I was looking forward to it and it didn't meet my expectations. Yeah. But I still think it's an important film.
Every now and then there are grumblings that they might want to reboot it or sequel or something.
Sure.
And it hasn't been as hot right now, but every now and then you hear about it. They do want to dip into that again.
Well, Carlos, that brings us to the end of 1982. I think that in the future, we've also talked about the possibility of highlighting other big genre years, and hopefully we'll hit one sometime in the future.
Yes, that's an excellent idea. I believe we talked about 1989 being a possible future year to hit. Once again, I'd like to thank Steve Avona for joining us, and all of you for listening to our show. Please join us again next time when we bring you another episode of Geekfest Rants.
Jolting tales of horror. Creep Show. From the author of Carrie, The Shining, and Cujo. And the creator of Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead. You'll scream at ghastly ghouls. Cringe at weird kids. And shiver at the doings of evil doctors.
This is going to be extremely painful, Mr. Verrill.
Creep Show will grab you, grow on you, and give you the creeps.
No, this is going to be an entirely new experience.
Creep Show, the most fun you'll ever have being scared.